Great. Well, I want to, well, we're seeing people join now. Let me give people a few minutes to sign in. All right, let's get started. I'm sure there'll be other people coming on board, but I think this little video we just saw was a great introduction to the purpose of the World Benchmarking Alliance. And what we're going to do today is really to dig deep into the food and agriculture benchmark, which is being released today, and which, of course, is timed to have some influence on the Food System Summit, which is happening later this week, as all of us are all too keenly aware. So we have a great panel today. My name is Ann Tutwiler. I'm going to be moderating the session, and have been chair of the expert review committee that has provided external guidance to the World Benchmarking team on building this wonderful benchmark that we're going to be talking about today. So just a couple of points that, as all of you are very well familiar with Zoom, but on this occasion, the Q&A function, which you all have, is specifically to ask more technical or deep questions about the benchmark to the World Benchmarking Alliance research team who are standing by, and of course any other questions that we might be able to answer from the panel. The chat function is enabled, and so it can be used to offer comments, and both of those will be monitored, and we will take up questions and issues raised in the chat as we are able and as time allows. So we do have standing by all of the World Benchmarking Alliance researchers who worked on this, in addition, of course, to Viktoria de Bourbon de Parme, who is going to present, who's the leader of this particular benchmark and is going to present the results in a minute. So first I want to turn it over to Joe Puri, who is newly named Associate Vice President at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, eventually more to be based in Rome. And Joe, you have a great career behind you and ahead of you. So if you could speak a bit about the importance of benchmarks to how IFAD does its business and the important role that companies have in shaping the rural communities. So over to you, Joe.
Thank you so much, Anne. And thank you to the Alliance also for having me here. I'm actually truly excited about this report. So let me talk very briefly. I think I have about 5 or 6 minutes. Look, in the lead up to the Food System Summit, I think some of the key facts are quite clear in front of us, right? Livelihoods of 1/3 of the world's people are derived from food systems. So that's pretty well known. We also know that overall food that is produced is in value, priced at costs approximately $10 trillion. It's priced at $8 trillion. So we know that there are differences between what is the true cost of production of this food and what it is priced at. And that's what most economists call externalities or negative externalities. We also know that a large part of the food that gets that comes to our table, so 1/3, and this is what IFAD focuses on, 1/3 of the food in your plate is really produced by smallholder farmers. That is, farmers who produce on 2 hectares of land or less. Most of them are present in developing countries. But we also know that most of the value that gets created beyond the farm gate is not value that smallholder farmers can tap into and really are privileged from. So I think the benchmarking report comes at a very important point of our overall understanding of the Food System Summit and of the food systems. So for example, what IFAD is essentially taking to the Food System Summit and beyond is asking for a disruption of the food system as it exists today, primarily to recognize the imbalance in power, the distribution of value between the actors that are big and the actors that are small, but nonetheless extremely important. So I have 4 messages today. First, I think it's really important when we think about large corporations and large actors as to what the responsibility can be in terms of bridging the gap between these large corporations and smallholder farmers. The 350 companies that are in the scope of this account account for more than half of the global food and agriculture revenue. They employ more than 23 million people and impact many of the 500 million smallholder farmers that IFAD directs its own mandate towards. So, but the small and medium enterprises, which is basically what IFAD directs its attention to, and also wants the world to focus on in terms of investments as well as providing financial incentives, are really a critical part through which large corporations can help to build vertical supply chains. These small and medium enterprises are also local, and by tapping into these, you also tap into local markets as well as local labor. So that's the first message: bridge the gap between smallholder farmers, small and medium enterprises, and large corporations can do that. The second is that there is a responsibility with respect to nutrition and food as well. We know that hunger and food insecurity is on the rise. But what is unfair about the current system is that those that are producing most of our food are the ones that are also going hungry. So that's ironic, and actually it's hugely inequitable. Large corporations can and should ensure that they work together to make food accessible and affordable. So in one of our own reports that really highlight the key message that the benchmark report also brings out, we also talk about nudging consumers towards making informed decisions about nutritious food when it comes to their own purchasing choices. We also think that large corporations can invest far more on research and development to create more nutritious food products that can be produced by smallholder farmers. So that's the second message, right? Think about nutrition, think about, and can we get large corporations to really concentrate on the nutrition choices that we make? The third is the global good responsibility. Food systems contribute to more than 1/3 of the overall greenhouse gas emissions that we are witnessing in the world today. The IPCC report talked about the ugliness, essentially, of the fact that anthropocentric or anthropogenic emissions are on the rise, and that climate change is essentially irreversible at this point. So we need profound changes in the types of food being produced and production practices, as well as patterns of land use that can feed the world within planetary boundaries. To the extent that large corporations can pay for the externalities that are caused from these sorts of practices and recognize that there is a negative or a positive value that comes out of these production practices, I think it's really important to recognize that these externalities need to be playing a very important part in the overall value enumeration, as well as in the pricing that we are witnessing. And clearly, we need large corporations to recognize this in their own practices as well. And the fourth message, which I think the report is extremely eloquent about, is that accountability is key. right? As you talk about environmental, as you talk about social, as you talk about governance, responsibilities that large corporations have, I think the larger recognition is that there is a demonstration effect that we are looking towards them for. So while governments are making commitments at the Food Systems Summit to transform food systems at the national level, and development community is making commitments and supporting governments to deliver, we also need corporations to make commitments and to deliver on them, because we together need to hold ourselves accountable for the commitments that we are making to narrowing the gaps that we are witnessing on the SDGs. And in this context, I think that the Benchmark Alliance's work is critical, and the report being launched today to bring together transparency, accountability, and an independent assessment of progress is really key. Thank you so much. Back to you, Anne.
Thank you so much, Joe. I am always stunned by the fact that 1/3 of the food is produced by smallholders, 1/3 of our food is wasted, and a third contributes to roughly a third of greenhouse gas emissions, something all of us to keep in mind. So thank you so much. Victoria, I'm going to turn this now over to you for the moment we've all been waiting for, to hear the results of the really the first edition of the Food and Agriculture Benchmark. So Victoria, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you, Dr. Puri, for these really insightful and calls to action, which we hope through the benchmark results we can contribute into really seeking collaborations for change. And just a big welcome to the many participants. I think over 350 people have joined already, and we're very excited to share with you the findings today after an extensive research period that has gone into this work. Many of you are maybe new to WBA, so I'll first give you a little bit of a background. On the next slide, you see our mission, what we are set out to do. We are a non-profit organization funded by governments and philanthropic institutions, and we are essentially assessing companies against the SDGs. So we provide an independent monitoring, and by which we really want to recognize leadership. We want to share best practices, but we also create accountability for the companies that are lagging behind. And we're very grateful to be formed as an alliance, which means that over 250 organizations are supporting this work. These organizations range from investors, business associations, NGOs, academia. But together with also other stakeholders like governments and the companies themselves, are really crucial to our work, crucial in when we are developing our methodologies to make sure that we are building on existing frameworks and science-based targets. But these collaborations are also crucial to realize impact. So we look really forward after this launch to working together with all of you. On the next slide, you see how we've translated the SDGs into 7 different systems. And I'm responsible for the food and agriculture work at WBA. So in total, we are assessing over 2,000 companies at the World Benchmarking Alliance. But today we will be zooming in on the 350 most influential food and agriculture companies. On the next slide, you see that we've grouped these 350 companies in 6 different segments. Some of them are, of course, present in more than one segment because they're vertically integrated, but all of these companies are international and they have a dominant position in the food system. They are headquartered in 41 different countries. And as Dr. Puri said, they represent over half of global revenue. So while some of the companies are family-owned, they are not small players. Each company at least has 1 billion in annual revenue. And I'm sure actually that during your last meal that you've consumed today, directly or indirectly, you were probably linked to one or more of these companies. So we have assessed these companies on their own operations, as well as the impact they have on their value chain. These companies are not only big in revenue size, but they are directly employing over 23 million people around the world, and also influencing and impacting over the hundreds of millions of farmers and consumers that they reach through their supply chain. So in the next slide, you see an overview of our methodology. It's a busy slide. I won't go into the details. You can see all the details on our website. But as you see, it has 4 measurement areas. We looked at all of these 4 measurement areas. We have 45 indicators in total that we assessed all of these 350 companies against. And you see on your screen that the top left-hand side is the biggest bracket. It's the social inclusion measurement area. And that is because it's in line with the SDGs mission to leave no one behind. On the next slide, you will see that, of course, a benchmark comes with a ranking, and a ranking is composed from different scores. So we have attributed the 3 thematic areas of environment, nutrition, and social inclusion. They are each representing 30% of a company's total score. The final 10% come from the governance and strategy indicators. So I will walk you through now through the 5 key findings that we've pulled out of this research. And first starting with the ranking findings. And you see on your screen the top 10 companies from this food and agriculture benchmark. And we are very pleased to see high scores across this top 10. Unilever claiming the #1 position with over 70% of the total achievable scores, which is a very strong achievement. But also the top 10 demonstrates that leadership can come from any part of the value chain. As I mentioned earlier, we have divided these companies in 6 different segments, and we are very pleased to see that at least 1 company from 5 of those segments is in the top 10. You see in the top 3 familiar names from the food and beverage manufacturers and processors. So after Unilever, you see Nestle, Danone. Further down, you have AB InBev, PepsiCo, and Diageo. But at number 4, you see OCP, one of the world's largest fertilizing companies, which is a Moroccan state-owned company, and who will be speaking at our business panel later in the event, together with Unilever. The UK retailer Tesco's, coming in at number 7, is followed by Fonterra, a New Zealand dairy cooperative that is owned by 10,000 farmers. And finally, on number 10, you see Firmenich. This is a Swiss food ingredients and flavoring company. The only segment which is not represented in the top 10 are the restaurants and food service providers. The highest scoring company in that segment is the French caterer Sodexo, which is ranking number 30. So we're very glad to see this leadership across the board, which will hopefully incentivize others to step up their efforts as well. On the next slide, you see a more detailed graph of how all the companies, all the 350 companies are performing. And as you see, unfortunately, after the leadership at the top, you see scores very rapidly declining. So there's actually 229 companies that failed to score above 25%, which really calls for action to bring these companies to the table and to ignite the conversations and really to share experiences on how they can also contribute to food systems transformation. Now I will go into the findings per measurement area. First of all, governance and strategy. This is a measurement area where companies actually perform the best, which is not surprising, because if you want to see action, it usually starts with a strong strategy. But even here, we do see areas of improvement. We see that strategies could be more actionable in their wording and in their targets. We see that only less than 2% of companies are linking the remuneration policies of top management to sustainability targets. And an area of improvement can be as well to conduct more stakeholder engagement activities that feed into this important strategies. Moving on to the environmental findings. We have 12 different indicators in this area, and I'm focusing in first instance on the indicators relevant to mitigate climate change. So you see that on the graph on your left-hand side, that we found only 26 companies that are aligning their targets against the 1.5-degree trajectory as set by the Paris Agreement. But we are seeing 26, which is great, which can lead the way and can incentivize others to move up and set targets against science-based targets. We see that deforestation needs very much improvement. There's only 40% of companies that have set a target at all. And unfortunately, none of the companies are demonstrating that they are achieving 100% deforestation-free supply chains for their high-risk commodities. And especially a risky area in this is the animal protein companies, which very much need to step up their efforts. We do see action across areas which are relevant to regenerative agriculture. So about 45% are contributing to improving soil health and agrobiodiversity. A less number of companies are actually disclosing quantitative evidence, but this can be improved. As well as areas of reducing water use and food loss and waste are areas where really action needs to step up. But we hope that the few companies that are taking action on this and that are sharing their journey through sharing quantitative evidence of improvement are actually leading the way for others and incentivizing others to do the same. The next measurement area that I would like to share our findings of is social inclusion. Here, companies have performed very poorly. We do acknowledge that the bar in this benchmark has been set high. It has been a high bar to reach to receive first scores, but this is also because this area is not new to food and agriculture. We know that human rights are at risk in this sector, and actually the mechanisms to ensure protection of these human around for a while, like the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, have been drafted 10 years ago. And that is why, for example, in child labor, we have looked at whether companies are explicitly requiring their own operation and supply chain to prohibit child labor. And 202 companies are not doing that, while this is in line with ILO conventions. So much area of improvement to be done there. Of course, these topics are very closely linked to living wage. We are glad to see that this topic has been gaining traction in the UN Food Systems Summit preparations and hope to see big improvements in the next iteration. Encouragingly, over 50% of companies are improving farmer resilience. And if those commitments can be extended to providing a living wage, it will truly have a tremendous impact on the millions of people depending on agriculture for their livelihoods. And moving on to the final measurement area, which is nutrition. We've heard Dr. Puri speak about the importance of nutrition for our food system. This is an area where companies have performed the weakest, but we also acknowledge that this is an area which is still in development. It's developing societal expectations on how best we can measure companies' actions. For example, we don't have science-based targets in this area, but we do know that nutrition is crucial for food systems and that every company in the value chain can contribute to this. So from farm to fork, we see that contribution to this is very low. When you look at accessibility and affordability of healthy foods, it's 80% of companies that don't have a commitment, that don't basically see a role for themselves in this area. And I'd like to point out that in this measurement, we've looked at companies from upstream and downstream, but when assessing companies more upstream, further away from the consumers, we've looked at this in a more broader spectrum. So really looked at how are these companies contributing to food security, for example, through diversification or fortification. And only 3 companies have demonstrated quantitative reporting in this area, which are DSM, Arla, and Friesland Campina. But when we zoom into the consumer-facing companies, we found that especially retailers and food service providers can step up their efforts by having responsible marketing practices in place. Many of them don't at the moment. And finally, with these 350 companies, as I said, they employ over 23 million people across the world. So workforce nutrition can have a very direct impact on helping people to improve their diets. And it is encouraging to see that 90 companies have implemented at least one of the 4 programs that is suggested by the Workforce Nutrition Alliance. And that actually demonstrates that this is an area where companies can rapidly improve their efforts. And so with that, you know the findings, and I'd like to hand it over to Anne and introduce our panel of change makers on the ground. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you so much, Viktoria. I'm always amazed at, how much work has gone in behind these, 5 or 6 slides that you presented, and the amazing work that's been done by the team of researchers that's online here, including double and triple checking these results and having many eyes cross-checking to make sure that the results have been captured accurately. And of course, it does show that we have a lot of work to do with the agribusinesses that have been looked at under the Food and Ag benchmark today. So let me turn now to our panelists. We have 3 wonderful panelists who are change makers on the ground, who are each working to address environmental, nutritional, or social impacts in our current food systems. So let me jump right to them. I'm going to introduce them, and then Sebastian, I'm going to ask you to be the first speaker here. So Sebastian Pedraza Paez is a Colombian youth leader with significant experience in rural youth and development issues. He is the chair of the steering committee and coordinator of the Latin America for Young Professionals in Agriculture Development. Nimrod Wambette is a small coffee producer, social critic, and ethical values advocate. He is chair of the Mount Elgon Agroforestry Community Cooperative. And I have to say, Nimrod, I lived on Mount Elgon for a couple of years, but on the Kenyan side when I was just out of college. So I know where you're dialing in from. And finally, we have Michael Ojo, who is the Nigerian country director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, or GAIN, who is leading on making healthier food choices more affordable, more available, and more desirable. So Sebastian, if I could go to you. Great. So I have 2 questions for you, and if you could keep your remarks to about 3 minutes for the first question and 3 minutes for the second one. So the first question is, overall, the most influential companies are not leading us, as we have just heard, towards a sustainable food system. Only 26% have set targets to reduce emissions to the Paris goals. As a youth advocate, what would you say to the leaders of these companies, particularly on their climate impact?
Thank you so much to everyone, to having me here in this amazing panel. In this amazing, it was amazing report, and it's also a challenge, to keep working hard to empower also youth and also these companies to be part of the change. So I think our generation, is characterized to be a generation of the action. And there is more and more people interested, to do something against climate change, especially youth leaders, young people. And right now, I think climate change is no longer a myth. Climate change is a reality that is affecting our society, and this problem demands actions, specific actions. Demand the way that we are change the way that we are living, change the way that we are producing, and also the way that we are, the decision that we are taking every day. So my message to these companies can be only one, and is, how do you want to be remembered? As a leader against, in the fighting against the climate change, or be one of the and the protection of the planet, or one that is the responsible of the acceleration of this climate change. So we invite you to be part of the solution, and we are working hard, to make sure that our future generations have a better planet, a better food system that we have right now. So it's an invitation, and this specific message. How do you want to be remembered? This is for the first question.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that's what we all focus on in our lives, right? How do we want to be remembered? So secondly, you're part of a movement of young rural professionals for ag development. What does that mean to you? What does being a leader in this sector mean to you? And how can we work with yourself and similar groups in other countries to help shift the mindsets of those who are not contributing? And I guess one thing I'd like you to talk about, that's not in your questions, but I do feel that the companies who've done well are going to have a better shot at recruiting really strong young leaders to work in the agri-food sector. And so if you could talk a little bit about that too, thanks.
Perfect. Yeah, I think YPARD is a international movement of youth leaders that are working from different sectors. We consider that the change and the fighting against climate change demand multi-sectoral efforts. So I think be part of this international movement and also working with international networks is a big responsibility, to bring all the voices of the youth leaders, also the ones that are, in the ground very, very far, and they don't have the opportunity to bring into these spaces of policy making, where we are the policy making, and to make sure that these policies, be like with like being considered, with the characteristics and the needs of the territories. There are a lot of times where policymakers and governments make a lot of policies that are not, according with the context of the young leaders and according with the context of the producers. So this is super important. Make sure that all the voices be heard, in this, especially in these spaces. And also it's mobilized, the power of youth. I think we as youth, have ideas, innovation, and it's an amazing opportunity, to put all together to bring and think in new solutions. So I think for these companies, we need to try to work with them and say, hey, you want to be like part of the change or part of the problem? So I think it's a big responsibility, and it's also a challenge, and it's an honor. I think in the future, in some years, we want to think and just go back in the past and say, okay, what did you do? What I did for save the planet. So this is a big responsibility, and it's a message for the companies. What is doing your company to save the planet? You are part of the solution or part of the problem. So we invite you to be part of this amazing group of organizations, international organizations, and also companies that are working so hard to try to achieve the sustainable development goals and try to save the planet. So I think it's just the last message. And also to everyone that is being part of this amazing webinar is, remember that the decision that we make every day can make the difference. The decision about what we eat and where is this food coming can make the difference. So it's a responsibility, and let's take the actions. Let's be part of the solution.
Great. Thank you so much, Sebastian. Maybe you can put in the chat some links to your organization and these other global organizations that you referenced for people who might be interested in learning more. So thank you. Nimrod, if I can go over to you. So welcome. Two questions for you, same rules, 3 minutes each, please. So coffee crops are one of the most sensitive crops to climate change. How are you and your fellow coffee producers being affected by climate change now? And how is your cooperative adapting to the challenges that you're seeing?
Thank you, Anne. Are you hearing me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, the impact is great because I live on the front line of climate change in this sub-Saharan region. The impact is that suitable areas have shrunk, suitable areas for growing coffee and other food crops have shrunk because of changing seasonality. There is loss of land suitable for coffee because coffee is migrating up the mountains in the high altitudes. There is a reduction in production and the yield, increase in pests and diseases, leading to poor cherry, coffee yield, and banana bacteria yield as a result of rising temperatures and unstable rainfall patterns, too much floods or too much drought. So that's the impact we are facing, and the coffee yield is reducing year after year. But what we are doing is to adopt some of the climate smart agriculture in my cooperative. For example, we have got extension workers, but we can't afford to pay all of them, but we have those who are helping farmers in soil management. And also we are collaborating with research institutions to get the new climate extreme resistance crops. Although this is slow, it's not coming as fast as we want. We are also trying to help farmers to adopt new technologies to enhance productivity and food security. Part of it is irrigation, although irrigation is a very expensive venture. We are trying to influence government to ensure that they help us to trap water and bring it down to the gardens. We are also influencing policy through our Apex organizations to ensure that the government takes a keen interest and puts enough budget in this resilience. We are diversifying through agroforestry, through intercropping, and other diversification strategies. We have got improved seed varieties, which we are distributing to farmers, and for drought tolerant species specifically. So we are addressing productivity, adaptation, and mitigation as a way of increasing resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Nimrod. And your remarks show just how much the rubber hits the road, as we say, where you are at the end of the value chain for coffee and the wonderful foods that we eat, and just the amount of effort that you and your cooperative are going to make sure you can adapt. And that message needs to go very much up the chain to the big coffee companies and others who have the power to invest in the technology, in the research and development and innovation. So thank you so much for that answer. So we are seeing a few companies who are providing support that's needed to move towards the Paris goals and the SDGs and to ensure living incomes for farmers. What would, in your view, be the impact if companies did move in force to actually be able to guarantee farmers in their value chains a living income?
Thank you, Anne, and fellow panelists. The quest for living income for small producers is as old as the modern states. And the governments and the food chain players, they recognize that our critical role in global food systems, but they are not doing much to enable us consistently supply the food they want. The biggest hindrance to achieving living income lies in the gaps in the income for small producers in the global food value chain. For example, there are policy gaps by governments in land use, land ownership, in input supply, in gender disparity, and in dealing with the discriminating norms which limit the women who produce most of the food into exercising their rights. We have gaps in information. By our nature, small producers are rural based. They are very far away from decision makers who live in the cities. So we have information gaps between us and the markets, between us and the people who make decisions for our living. There are also gaps there are also tariffs and the barriers which are imposed. Some of the tariffs are not addressed to help us generate more income. There is also poor infrastructure, both the communication infrastructure and the transport infrastructure for us. I don't think there is global political will to influence these companies who make huge profits from our labor to ensure that we get maximum returns to enable us to pay a living income. Well, there are a few companies who are looking back at us and asking how we are, but the percentage, as as even demonstrated by your research, is very, very small. There are middlemen who should be eliminated. There are some middlemen in the chain who really just make money, but they don't put in much labor. We hear of Wall Street people who make decisions about the pricing of our coffee. I don't know whether these are speculators or because they have their money and because of the speculation, they reduce our bargaining power and therefore limit our access to generating an income which can make our standards of living improve. There is inequality in marketing systems, great inequality, and there is also too much greed by these companies for profit at the expense of humanity. We think that these companies who are making rich profit, some of them even don't know where the crops we grow come from. They should be, I think we should engage them to ensure that they really look back at where the coffee is coming from so that they can sustainably get the products we put our labor to produce. So in summary, I think we need a renewal in engagement and a commitment by key players to enable us grow, sell, and save by tackling contributing factors. Government policy needs to be addressed, addressing issues of equality and equity in gender, addressing labor laws, land reform, discriminatory practices, and we also need the market access by cutting down on the bureaucracies which limit us to engage directly with the market. This in my view, can contribute to increased household incomes so that we grow coffee and enjoy the benefits of growing coffee as the consumers enjoy the cup quality. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. So I just want to say thank you because of how complex your answer was to that question and how complex the challenge is. But I think if COVID in the last year and a half have taught us anything, it is that the farmers have to be seen by the companies as partners in production, not as simply suppliers of raw commodities, and just changing that mindset. And as you said, coming and seeing what life is really like and where these commodities come from can help a lot. So thank you so much. Michael, over to you. So let me ask you two questions. So one is, we see that nutrition has been one of the hardest themes for companies to implement. Many companies don't see themselves as direct players in the nutrition, setting nutrition goals. What were the most impactful projects that you have led together with companies from different parts of the value chain around the world?
Yeah, thank you very much, Anne, and I hope you can hear my voice okay. Maybe if I can just take maybe 30 seconds just to really say it's great to see this report out. And I must commend the fantastic, professional, painstaking effort that's gone into this output from the team at WBA. As a member of the expert review committee, I had an inside track to the rigor with which this output has been approached. So the product is hard hitting, yes, in the sense that too many companies are not doing well across all the parameters benchmark. But it's also encouraging because 11 companies that score a pass mark, and some of them a really good pass, cover nearly all the 6 segments of the supply chain, as has been mentioned already. So the message really here is that it can be done if the focus and the will is there. And what a better time than in the build up to the UN Food System Summit for this benchmark to be raising the stakes for business accountability. Also great to be sharing this platform with 2 people representing something I used to be. I won't go back to being young, at least not in body, but I'll try to keep youthful in spirit. I was also once a snail farmer, recently in a joint venture with my wife and my mother-in-law. Unfortunately, all the snail meat went on plates as opposed to markets. So I have a personal experience of the tension between producing nutritious food for sale or for your own consumption. But I will go back to farming, so watch this space. So now to the question quickly. The companies have really struggled against the nutrition indicators in this benchmark. And my overall impression is that businesses are simply not prioritizing nutrition. Now, there are real easy to harvest opportunities that we have seen from the work we do at GAIN. And I would just mention three very, very briefly. So we do a lot of our work in countries with businesses. And in many of these contexts, workforce nutrition and health programs can be very impactful, not just as an entry point to sensitize management and boards and shareholders about nutrition, but also for employees. The fact that only 90 out of these 350 companies have a workforce nutrition program of any sort underlines for me the opportunity that's been missed. In a sector where just these companies alone employ 23 million people directly and 500 million through the supply chains. And these are, really big numbers, and you hear them mentioned over and over again. Workforce nutrition and health schemes can have a benefit cost ratio of between 3 and 6 to 1 in terms of economic benefits. And we're linked to living wages. These schemes can enable employees to invest more in their own nutrition by buying and consuming more nutritious foods. So this is one opportunity. And I would like to invite you, all the people on the call, on the webinar, to visit the Workforce Nutrition Alliance website for some more information around that. Secondly, very quickly, is the Scaling Up Nutrition Business Network, or SBN, which presents another big opportunity. SBNs walk through the collective actions of a range of stakeholders involved in the business of nutrition to help government shape the enabling environment for nutritious food businesses, to support businesses to create demand for nutritious foods, and to improve access to these nutritious foods for consumers. In Nigeria, the network has been in place for about 5 years now and has nearly 250 members representing businesses of all sizes. So from global companies, including some of those on the pass list here, to SMEs, who are the engines of the food and nutrition landscapes in many of our countries. Members of SBN have to make smart nutrition commitments, which could be anything from initiating workforce schemes to reviewing the nutritional quality of their food products, to launching new and more nutritious products, and for the larger members to supporting smaller growing businesses with technical assistance to scale their operations, or just supporting these SMEs through linkages to their supply chains. Every single one of these 350 companies should now engage SBN globally and start encouraging their local subsidiaries to join in the work of national SBNs as a starting point. Third and finally, I'll talk about post-harvest loss reduction. So GAIN launched the Post-Harvest Loss Alliance for Nutrition plan, as we call it, to reduce the loss of nutritious foods through the supply chain. In Nigeria, we initially focused this work on tomatoes as a proxy for the fresh fruit and vegetable supply chains. Our research has shown that nearly 40% of fresh fruit and vegetable produce in sub-Saharan Africa was being lost within the supply chain segments of handling and storage, processing and packaging, and distribution. But with smart interventions aimed at these supply chain segments, we can make a real impact on post-harvest losses, especially of perishable and animal source foods, and significantly increase access to these nutritious foods in the most vulnerable markets. Plan work through 3 intervention models, an alliance platform, a series of innovation challenges, and a business-to-business engine to develop cost-effective business models now in use in the country context. To tackle cold chain challenges, examples include solar-powered cold logistics and the cold hub model, which can be deployed in wet markets. So the alliance itself gave birth to the Organization for the Advancement of Cold Chain Technologies in West Africa, which is a legacy industry-led membership organization carrying on the work of ensuring the enabling environment continues to be favorable for those wishing to invest in post-harvest loss reduction. So these are examples of low-hanging opportunities that I commend to our leading companies today. Over to you, Anne.
Great, thank you, Michael. And I think you've answered the second question. So, and we're running behind time because we've had such great comments. So if I have time, we'll come back to you for a little bit of elaboration, but I think your colleagues are putting information in the chat about the plans and initiatives that you've mentioned. But if there's anything missing, please put it in the chat so people can dig in a little further on the work that GAIN has been doing. So thank you. So now I want to go over to our intervention by Dr. Agnes Calabata. As you all know, she is the chair of the UN Food Systems Summit. And as you also probably know, since that summit is going to be on Thursday, she's a little busy. So we have a pre-recorded interview with Dr. Calabata. So Charlotte, if you can run the interview, thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Calabata, the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy to the Food Systems Summit 2021. You have seen the results of the Food and Agriculture Benchmark and who have worked with diverse multi-stakeholder actors for over a year in preparation of the summit. What are your expectations of the private sector? What actions should be accelerated and scaled up?
Thank you for this question, Victoria, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. Businesses have been under a major component of the food system. They're probably really the core of the food system. So there's a huge opportunity for businesses here to really understand and take advantage of the energy we have mobilized in the food system, the actions we have catalyzed in the food system, but also really bring forward the ability, the knowledge they have, the science they have behind them to be able to ensure that we transform our food system. We have identified that our food system has so much in terms of what we are calling true cost. Private sector can be part of ensuring that we invest in the right things and we minimize costs to people and to the environment. So that's something private sector can do. Private sector can ensure that this whole idea of value chains that do not come through for a whole lot of people that participate in those value chains goes away. And it's good to see that value chain, that private sector has particularly been interested in committing to a living income, to decent work. And this is one of the areas that they are particularly interested in. And I'm looking forward to how they can engage in this. But also businesses engage around the fact that they engage around food, they influence the choices we make, they influence what gets to our table. They can also be part of ensuring that we save our environment. So I'm really hoping that through all the action tracks that we have and action areas we have defined for the Food System Summit, I'm hoping that private sector sees the opportunity to be able to come through on nourishing people, to be able to come through on boosting nature-based solutions of production, recognizing that our environment is struggling, to be able to come through on advancing equity and decent work, like I said before, and to be able to come through on resilience. I actually see that these all present different opportunities for investment, and private sector is innovative. So I hope that they can be creative, innovative, and be at the forefront of creating businesses that can change the trajectory of where our world is going.
Indeed, those are great areas of focus and also many topics that we've assessed in our benchmark. I was wondering, if we look at the follow-up, in your opinion, how can we hold companies to account as they support work with the governments in their national pathways following the summit?
So there are a number of things that I would like to see in that area. Private sector has been engaging throughout the summit, talking about around areas they can commit to, and I welcome all these areas that they can commit to. I would like to see a little bit more intentionality on accountability. We have to make sure that whatever we commit to, there are mechanisms of tracking to make sure that we come through as a community. The only way we can measure that we are coming through is when we hold each other accountable. So yes, private sector, through the World Benchmarking Alliance, the work you're doing, which is a great job you're doing, making sure that we all stay on top of what we're doing, really taking that work seriously and making sure that there are mechanisms of accounting, there are critical indicators of accounting for the work that we are doing and for what we are taking on, and being able to report progress against it. In the Food System Summit, we are thinking that maybe every 2 years we should be coming back to assess the progress we are making. I hope that private sector will be part of sitting at that table and will be at the forefront of showing that we are making progress towards SDGs on the areas we've agreed on. We've recently launched an online commitment registry, which is really to ensure and to encourage private sector to be part of initiatives, coalitions, ideas that can start moving the needle at country level. It would be good to see how private sector engage with some of these multi-stakeholder efforts, recognizing that they too are part of the world that we work with. They too are concerned about the very issues that we are all concerned about. So we want to see them really work with governments, work with civil society, work with all of us to try to really figure out a better world. It's also recognizing that private sector can't do it alone. Governments and all those institutions that I've talked about need to understand this and bring private sector at the core of how they are working. We have governments now that are working on national pathways. I hope those national pathways recognize that putting strategies in place is important, putting policies in place is important, and letting private sector do its part is important and hold it to account. But it's really important to give them space to be able to do their work. And lastly, of course, I hope that private sector can really account for its performance around farmers and producers and the people at the end of each value chain. I really hope they can account for that. And when I say the people that are at the end of each value chain, there are two types of people at the end of each value chain. They are producers and they are consumers. Those two groups of people are depending on private sector to do the right thing. I hope that they can embrace accountability to those two types of people and how we do business around those two groups of people.
Well, you've really done a great effort to bring all of those people together the past year, and I know all of them are really keen to work on this moving forward for the summit and to keep that momentum going. So thank you so much, Dr. Calabata. We really very much appreciate your intervention and for making time in your extremely busy schedule these days. Wish you, and just finally, just wishing you good luck for the summit, and know that there's a great support from all of these actors present here today to really realize the SDGs by 2030. Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you all, having you all tuned in 23rd of September. Here we go, the summit.
Welcome, Dr. Calabata.
Right. Well, thank you. That was a great interview, and please, Viktoria, convey our thanks to Dr. Calabata for taking time to make those remarks, and I think very prescient about the really important role that private sector, and the only role private sector can play in making sure that the producers and consumers are benefiting from the agri-food system. So now we want to turn to a panel of business voices, including two companies that are in the top ranking, and I think we'll address one of the questions that's come up in the chat about how the companies feel about these results, and we also have an investor on this panel who can talk about how these kinds of results will over time influence investors, and of course someone from the World Business Council that's helping to drive these conversations. So just very quickly, Robert de Vried is the Executive Vice President of Global Food at Unilever, who is ranking #1 in the Food and Ag benchmark. Then we'll hear from Ilyas El-Fali, who is advisor to the chairman and CEO of the OCP Group, which is a leading producer of phosphate and fertilizer, an African company headquartered in Casablanca, Morocco. OCP ranks 4th and is the leading in the upstream companies. Diane Holdorf is the managing director of Food and Nature at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and has played an important role in the UN Food System Summit and has been working very closely with working with companies to enact the kinds of changes that we're hoping to incentivize as part of the World Benchmarking Alliance. And finally, Lot Beck, who works for Macquarie's Global Equity Investment Team in Luxembourg, who is working to integrate these environmental, social, and governance indicators into investors' plans and strategies. So, Robert, if I can go to you first.
Sure.
So Unilever has been a company with outspoken sustainability strategy for many years. It's a holistic approach covering all crucial aspects of food systems transformation. What topics do you think are going to be most important for Unilever in the coming years to deliver on the 2030 agenda?
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for having me on the panel. Let me start by saying that as one of the world's largest food companies, we're fully aware that we've got a responsibility to help create a fairer, healthier, and more sustainable food system. And we're very happy to see that our efforts so far have been rewarded, ranking #1 in the WBA ranking as announced today. But we also acknowledge we have a long way to go still. And we will take on board any of the learnings coming out of this assessment to further improve. The journey itself actually started 10 years ago when we started with the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, setting out 3 big goals to transform socially, environmentally, and also the economic performance across the value chain. Now, the good news is that we see constantly that this is also good business, because our brands with purpose, as we tend to call our brands that are active in this space, like Knorr, like Ben & Jerry's and Hellmann's, continuously and consistently outperform the average growth rate of Unilever. But our journey continues, and also what we need to do is raising in terms of benchmarks. So last year we launched our Future Foods commitments, a new set of public commitments, and let me name a few key ones before I select the final one. So we committed to creating 1 billion of sales annually, derived solely from plant-based meat and dairy alternatives by 2025-2027, doubling the number of products that provide a positive nutrition whilst reducing consistently the salt, sugar, and calorie intakes from our existing portfolio. And not unimportant, we mentioned it also earlier with the greenhouse gas effects, we also want to halve the food waste in our own operations by 2025. Now, you already hear from these target sets that the food system transformation we need is multifaceted. So all aspects are actually important to come to this more inclusive and sustainable food system. But if you ask me to choose one topic specifically, I would choose the protein transformation. First, this one is better for people and for planet. If you're looking at the 2019 Eat Lancet report, it showed very clearly that a diet with more veggies and less meat offers both health and environmental benefits. And as a result, we are expanding our plant-based meat and dairy alternative businesses. The Vegetarian Butcher is our fastest growing brand globally. After acquiring it in 2018, we now expanded this brand into more than 45 countries. And it's also chosen as the supplier for Burger King's plant-based Whopper and plant-based nuggets across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and China. And maybe a fun but also delicious nice fact, our most recent new innovation, the new raw burger, is exactly building to that point. Yeah, it is 40% less saturated fat and contains considerably more iron than normal beef. And it is fortified with B12 and iron. So indeed, better for people and better for planet. But protein transition is not only about full meat replacement. I'm very happy to say that in Latin earlier this year, we launched a Knorr product called Rindemas, 100% plant-based, herbs of spices, veggies, and plant-powered protein to help consumers extend their meat, meaning using less meat, but still able to make a delicious homemade dish with burgers and meatballs, and actually giving you a better juiciness and a better taste experiences while we are reducing that meat intake. But we've also launched a range of non-dairy ice cream options. We've got main brands like Ben & Jerry's, Magnum, Cornetto offering these plant-based products. And again, to show that this has business potential, Ben & Jerry's is today the #1 producer of premium non-dairy desserts, completely without animal products. So if you ask me to choose one bet, I would choose for protein transformation.
Great, thank you. I think the point that it's both and, right? Plant-based exactly. and other ways to be more sustainable in the production and consumption of animal-based products. So one question we heard earlier from Nimrod about the importance of the value chain and the farmers at the end of that value chain, or maybe I should say at the beginning of that value chain. So how are you working with your supply chain partners to expand your impact beyond the companies that you own, which you've talked about so eloquently, all the way down to the farm level?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. Let me start with the simple fact that there is no way we can reach our sustainability or our business targets without partnering. And so only by working together across this entire food value chain, we will be able to reach our goals. Supply chain partners, but but also other parties like governments and NGOs, critical to ensure that we can drive this right change. What helps, we find, is to clarify standards. So what are we going after? So that each party can identify what is the role that they can play to contribute to that total transformation change. Let me give an example. With Unilever, we've had a long-term sustainable agricultural code in place, a collection of best practice principles for farming that hundreds, now even thousands of farmers are using to make their operations more sustainable. And earlier this year, we launched our Unilever Regenerative Agricultural Principles, actually building on top of those earlier mentioned sustainable agricultural framework, and now creating a blueprint on which we want to build programs with very clear KPIs and impact metrics that support this nature positive production. We're on a learning journey ourselves, and we're implementing these principles through what we call lighthouse programs, looking at different crops, different geographies to really find the locally adapted solutions and factor in those local challenges. Maybe to give an example. So what we're doing for soil health in the US, from the soy oil that we're using in our world famous Hellmann's mayonnaise. In Iowa in the US, we're working with soy farmers and soy oil suppliers on a regenerative farming project to introduce cover crops as a way to protect the soil. This enhances the sustainability of this key ingredient for our Hellmann's brand. Now, the program looks at 3 types of support. First, financially, so farmers receiving a cost share from Unilever to enable this planting of cover crops. Second, and not unimportant, practical, so support from farmers providing technical assistance. And the third component being a social component. So where the group of farmers is actually working as a collective to share best practices and to develop a social support system. And this is kind of working because you see that the program has grown enormously since 2015 when we started this. We started with a small 23 number of farmers. Today we're in 361 farmers planting these cover crops over 4 times more acres than in 2015 when we started. Actually, this initiative alone now represents 10% of all the Iowa cover crops alone. Now, allow me to close with an industry call to action to make regenerative agriculture really mainstream. Because only if we're working with others to adapt this common set of metrics that can help to drive impact on the ground. And to that end, we will need to continue to work with our partners at the UN, at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the World Economic Forum, One Planet Business for Biodiversity, you name it. So let me do this as a call out to all parties, including our competitors, to join us on this mission, because sustainability loves scale when it's about driving the right initiatives. And we look very much forward to partner with each and everyone who wants to help us to make regenerative agriculture mainstream. That would be my call to action.
Thank you, Robert. And again, congratulations to Unilever for being #1 in our ranking. So, Ilyas, if I can turn to you. OCP is leading on the UN Food System Summit Coalition for Living Wages and Income. And of course, also, and I think back to the remarks Robert just made, leading on the Soil Health Coalition. So as a fertilizer company, your business activities are really directly linked to farmers, and you've developed successful projects to improve their productivity. So if you can talk a little bit about those projects and how they have affected both resilience and revenues at the farm level, and particularly focusing on the role that upstream companies like yourselves can play. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. First, let me start by giving kudos to the World Benchmarking Alliance for pulling this benchmark in time for the Food System Summit. We are very pleased with the outcome of this benchmark and actually proud to see we are on the right track. Although we believe we are still at the beginning of an exciting journey that we are contemplating today with confidence and renewed resolution. Well, with this diagnostic, I believe companies all along the food value chain will now be aware of the main challenges of the transformation of the food systems. We strongly believe at OCP that the smallholder farmer should play a key role in this transformation. And I heard with great interest Dr. Puri elaborating on this earlier today. Smallholder farmers are at the heart of a fragile ecosystem that needs building efforts and strengthening initiatives. These development efforts are better driven collectively with multi-stakeholder collaboration, of course. The support of government is often also of utmost relevance in collaboration with the various public and private partners to fill in the gaps toward a better food system. Investment in programs and in-ground initiatives to empower smallholder farmers will enable the whole ecosystem to address food value chain bottlenecks, and most importantly, ensure smallholders living incomes and wages through enhanced productivity, better quality inputs, finance, technical assistance, access to markets, and more. This is what we do, for example, in Africa. You know, while OCP's footprint is global, our roots are in Africa, and we are an African company. There is so much potential to unlock sustainable agriculture throughout the continent. In 2016, OCP created a 100% dedicated subsidiary to the African continent, where more than 60% of the population is involved in the agricultural sector, and where the potential for production can feed the whole planet. We have designed end-to-end solutions to provide farmers with the best knowledge, systems, and tools to increase their yields, incomes, and livelihoods. Some of OCP's flagship programs, such as AgriBooster, OCP School Lab, Farmer Hub, and others, have reached more than 1 million farmers so far, who benefited from capacity building and agricultural support. For example, AgriBooster helped farmers increase their yields by more than 30% in average in 4 countries, Nigeria, Senegal, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire. Specific efforts have been deployed to empower vulnerable populations, among them youth and women, through dedicated programs such as IME, AgriPromoter, and the Women in AgriBooster. Lastly, I would say massive investment is also needed in research and development, and this has been mentioned earlier, to help farmers improve their yields, protect their soil, and overcome climate challenges. We welcome and, of course, underline the importance of basing food system transformation on the best available science.
Thank you. And just very quickly, because we're running behind, I'm a very bad timekeeper as a moderator. If you could just comment in 2 sentences on what your experience has been with and working with the Benchmarking Alliance, and what the company has learned from that process.
Well, most of all, I would say the benchmark helped us confirm that the challenges we are facing as a company undergoing its own transformation are in line with those of the food system challenges. OCP is a century-old company which started as a company mining and marketing phosphate rock. Today, OCP is a company that moved downstream, closer to the farmer, and while doing so, our core business shifted through the years to providing fertilizer solution to the farmer. We strongly believe that our strategic objectives as a business operating in this industry are in line with those of a sustainable agriculture that addresses the global challenges: climate change, food security, resource preservation, and decent livelihoods for the farmer. So these are major components of the food system transformation. So this is, for me, if I had only a sentence to summarize what we learned from this benchmarking process.
Thank you very much. So Diane, WBCSD and you yourself have worked really hard to bring all the business together around an ambitious statement that is the business declaration that was presented at the pre-summit. So how will the data that's coming from this benchmark help move the needle for the companies that you're working with on this really ambitious set of objectives that the business community has come up with? And I guess, how can we mobilize the broader group of companies that you're working with to follow the lead of these top 11? So
Hi, Anne. Yeah, glad to respond to that question. And congratulations, I should say, to all the companies, and especially those who are featured here and who are in the top 10. As Viktoria said, this is an initial benchmark. It set a high bar, and it's really great to see what companies are already demonstrating they can do. And that's a big part of what we've been working on as we've been supporting the UN and the Secretariat of the Food Systems Summit mobilize the private sector into setting a high bar of ambition as well, and to demonstrating what that leadership can look like working together with others. Our CEO, Peter Bacher, was appointed by the Secretary General to sit on the advisory committee of the Food Systems Summit, specifically to help mobilize private sector. And through that, we organized one of the big constituency groups, the Private Sector Guiding Group. And it was with that entire group of many business platforms representing businesses of all sizes across all geographies that we put together the business declaration in support of the Food Systems Summit. This is a document that really sets out the recognition that business has a catalyzing role to play in the global transformation towards an equitable, net zero, nature positive food system that can nourish all people. It recognizes that this urgent transformation is needed, that there are really severe environmental consequences, human risks for people and planet and for business. A big motivator is both risk management and opportunity, and demonstrating what that work can do across the total value chain. Because these food systems are local, regional, international, and really interconnected. And at their heart, they're people-centered. So we really have to collaborate across these stakeholders. So businesses, over 200 business leaders, again, globally of all sizes, have already signed on to this business declaration to support the ambition of doing several things. And you'll see how these really connect to the outcomes. One is scaling science-based solutions that really focus the transition towards sustainable food and agricultural models that really allow millions of farmers to adapt the regenerative agricultural practices that we've heard about from many of the speakers here already, so that we can get to net zero, nature positive food systems. Second, providing investments in research and innovation. This is some of what private sector does best, and we will continue to focus this on supporting the transformation across the value chain, from seeds, fertilizers, farm processes, selling, trading, transporting, and consumption, product design, development, and marketing. All of these things have a very important role to play in how we use digital technologies and other innovations to help for transformation. The third is contributing to improved livelihoods and well-being. We have to strengthen decent work and income opportunities in line with the SDGs that we're after an Agenda 2030 outcome after all. And this includes promoting living income and wages for farmers and workers all across these value chains. Fourth, we're committed to incentivizing consumers as agents of change. We've heard great examples already on what it takes to create demand for sustainably produced high quality products. And the protein transformation, for example, was one of the great reasons, Robert, as you were saying, that we have to really progress on this agenda. Additionally, we've got to include an increase in transparency. And this is one of the areas where the benchmark helps us the most. We have got to demonstrate how integrating environmental and social risks and impacts in governance through principles like the application of true value of food and audited sustainability indicators that are aligned to ESG standards, like Lada's going to speak to, will help drive greater clarity, both to consumers and to capital markets. And then finally, we've got to ensure that this transformation is equitable. So these are the key elements of the business declaration that so many leaders have signed on to. And there's already a number of coalitions that have coming through from the Food Systems Summit, including the Soil Health Coalition and the Living Global Income Coalition that both Ilias and Robert listed here. There's one on how we accelerate true value of food. There's the Zero Hunger Coalition. Many of these things are demonstrating the power of collective action, because while the benchmark looks at what companies are doing individually, it also is critical that we deliver these things collectively, and that's the way that we can really accelerate and scale the change.
Thank you, Diane. And that is a great segue into Lata's area of expertise in business. So Lata, over 60% of these companies are publicly listed, but I think a quarter of those are scoring below 25%. And as an investor, and as this has come up in the chat, what approach has been most effective at getting companies to integrate sustainability policies, and how do you see this benchmark helping to influence the same kind of investment strategies that we've seen in the climate space into the agriculture and food space. So again, we're running behind time, but love to hear from you. So
yeah, I'll try to make it brief and to the point. So just to give you a little bit of background, I work in an investment team where we are active investors and we have a very concentrated portfolio. So this gives us the opportunity to work really closely with the companies that we invest in and also know the details and the ambitions and familiarize ourselves with the ESG work from the companies that we invest in. And in our engagement activities, what we've actually seen is that companies are very much interested in learning from each other. So often when we suggest improvements or highlight things that we think work well, they ask us, okay, so who can you point to as a best practice? What is an example that you can highlight? Similar to what Robert also said in their supply chain. So what is the best practice? This is what actually works. So this is where benchmarking also comes into handy, is useful and can be a motivator, learning from each other, seeing what is considered best practice, highlighting the good examples and showing what works. Another thing that can motivate is to collaborate with other investors, because again, we know that from our daily lives as well, the more you hear things, the more you observe, the more aware you become of issues, and can also be a motivator to change in the more sustainable direction.
Right, thank you. And if I can ask the four speakers who've already talked to if there's any initiatives that you have mentioned in your remarks that you can put in the chat a link so that our audience can find out more, we'd really appreciate that. So Viktoria, I want to come back to you quickly to tell us what's next. This is not the be all and end all of the World Benchmarking Alliance on Food and Agriculture. We have future plans, so if you can give us a little bit of a taste.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you so much for the congratulations on the benchmark work. I'm going to pull up a slide that shows to you that we do more than just the benchmark. So we also have two really sector-specific indexes, one on seafood, which is launching in October during the Tokyo Seafood Summit, and the Access to Seeds Index. Many of you will be familiar with this. It has been around since 2016. We've seen how important diversification of seeds is. Nimrod Wambette mentioned this as well in his contribution. Today, the West and Central African Index has been launched. There's two other regional indexes coming up, East and South Africa in October and the Southeastern region in November. So watch our website for those results. But also what's next from a more global perspective on international events. Of course, the UN Food Systems Summit, just after this session, the Zero Hunger Pledge for the private sector will be launched. We've been asked as a benchmark to contribute to that, to provide the monitoring mechanism. We look forward to working with our allies at COP26 as well, and Nutrition for Growth. We've got a very exciting collaboration with the G7 that is pursuing to bring together businesses to pledge improvement against this benchmark within an initiative that's called the Sustainable Supply Chain Initiative. And just finally, a big word of gratitude to our co-host today, the Swiss government. And Anne, I'll hand it over to you to introduce Patrick Mink, who will be giving the closing remarks.
Thank you. Patrick, you and I know each other from my days in Rome. Really glad to have you here. So on behalf of the co-host of today's event, can we ask you as Senior Policy Officer at the Federal Office for Agriculture in Switzerland, what is the call to action? Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Anne. It is such a pleasure for me to represent Switzerland as a co-host of this launching event of the Food and Agriculture Benchmark today. And congratulations, first of all, to the World Benchmarking Alliance, Viktoria, the entire team, and also, well, both on the report as well as this great webinar today. We work with the World Benchmarking Alliance in the framework of the Sustainable Food Systems Program of the UN One Planet Network mainly. Switzerland is co-leading this multi-stakeholder initiative since 2015, and we would like to congratulate the World Benchmarking Alliance for recently joining its advisory committee. Promoting more sustainable food systems has long been a priority for Switzerland. To do so, we adopted a holistic and inclusive food systems approach that looks at the entire value chain, taking into account all relevant actors in the system. This is reflected in our new sustainable development strategy, which calls for food systems transformation. The strategy sets quantifiable targets and concrete measures in line with 4 strategic directions. One of these directions is enhancing sustainability throughout the food value chains. This requires efforts from all actors, and there is no doubt that business has an important role to play. Inclusiveness and dialogue are key ingredients to get all actors on board. We were pleased to see that 2 of the companies that figure among the top 10 in the food and agriculture benchmark are based in Switzerland. And we take that as a sign that our focus on inclusiveness and dialogue is bearing fruit. But to be fair, we also noted that some Swiss companies figure among the lower ranks, and we recognize that certainly more needs to be done. The benchmark launched today makes sustainability efforts through the value chains transparent, points towards areas for improvement, and it is therefore an important matrix for monitoring and reporting. It will help us better understand what is going from the field to the table and where we need to focus our efforts. And this is where we see the key value of the benchmark. On this basis, countries can play an important role in encouraging companies to translate their commitments into actions. However, it doesn't matter so much where specific companies stand on the benchmark today. What counts more is that everyone comes on board and joins the collective effort of transforming our food systems towards more sustainability. Switzerland has been championing inclusiveness and the need for a food systems approach in its role as co-lead of the UN One Planet Network's Sustainable Food Systems programs for many years. Through this program, we'll make sure to keep the momentum going beyond the UN Food Systems Summit, together with the World Benchmarking Alliance and our diverse membership of more than 190 organizations, including several UN agencies and other international organizations, member states from all world regions, civil society and scientific organizations, as well as private sector entities. And we invite everyone to join us in this collective effort. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is clear that sustainable farming alone will not lead to the systemic change that we need to see. We need to improve the sustainability performance of all actors involved. Benchmarking is an excellent tool to move us all together in the right direction on this journey. We therefore believe that the Food and Agriculture Benchmark can play an important role in the follow-up of the UN Food Systems Summit, and we invite everyone to make use of the report and to become part of that journey. Thank you very much. And back to you, Anne.
Thanks so much, Patrick. And I'm really thankful we gave ourselves an extra 5 minutes of time in case we ran over. So we are just on time to close. And I would just like to close by thanking all of our excellent panelists today. I think we've had a very rich discussion and great answers to the questions to show the importance of this benchmark and to highlight the companies that are leading the way and providing those best case scenarios that Diane and others have mentioned here. So thank you again so much to the World Benchmarking Alliance Food and Ag team. As members of the Expert Review Committee know, you have done an enormous amount of work putting this together and being so careful in how you've compiled these results, because you know how important they are to accountability and to the companies themselves. So thank you so much, and thank you to all our listeners. And I think there have been some great links in the chat to find out more about the Benchmarking Alliance, but also some of the initiatives that have been mentioned here today. So thank you, and we look forward to hearing all of the great results that are going to come out of this week and the UN Food Systems Summit on Thursday and please listen in. So thanks a lot. Have a nice rest of your day wherever you are.